Yes, guys, welcome back to another video. In this one, we're going to be doing another Best 23 for 2025 series video. Today, we're covering the North Melbourne Kangaroos, my beloved Kangaroos. So I'll get to kind of go through that. I hope I won't be too biased or I won't show too much emotion with it being the team that I follow, but I'll try my best. Once again, this is not going to be sort of a predicted lineup of what I think they're going to do going into round one. It's more of a my opinion thing, and as if I was the coach, what I would do in that situation. We're not going to take too much into consideration injuries and things like that, but some players that, potentially could be pushing for that round one lineup, if they haven't played too much football and I haven't seen much of them play for North Melbourne, I'm going to take that into consideration too. So just keep that in mind. We'll kick into it now. We'll jump into the defence. And I want you to focus there, if you look at the side, mostly on those key position players at the moment. You've got Comben there taking up that sort of traditional centre-half back role, Core as the fullback, and Griffin Logue as the third tall, if you like. I think it's interesting. The functionality of these North Melbourne three key defenders is probably the thing that I want to tap into the most here. You've got Comben, who looks to be the best suited to playing on that sort of gorilla forward. He's the biggest, the thickest set, and the tallest of all three, standing at around 200 centimetres is Comben. But he's also the one that gives you the best at winning the ball back off the opposition. He's the highest for intercept marks and that sort of thing. So he really creates a lot of drive out of there for your team as well. So that's really important and something that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about the responsibilities of a lockdown defender, which I think really more falls in the hands of both Aiden Core and Griffin Logue here. Logue is certainly your best one-on-one sort of lockdown defender of the three, but he also does have that athleticism to be able to come across and make those really important spoils as a sort of third key defender as well. But really what you're looking at here between the three, you've got Logue and Core as your absolute lockdown players. They have to play a little bit taller than what they actually are. Logue being about 193 and Core being around 195. They're going to have to take some of those bigger bodied players just because of their lockdown ability, which then frees up Comben to be able to do the intercepting. Then you go over to those, I guess you would call them the small to medium type defenders. Archer's your absolute lockdown player there. That's why I've got him sort of as the deepest role. He is, he's up around the 187 centimetre mark. He's actually a little bit bigger than what he looks. So he does have a little bit of an aerial game, but he doesn't really win the ball back for you that often in the air. He's more just adept at, lining up on a player like Toby Green, someone like that, and being able to try to take them out of the game. So he's really taking assets off the opposition as opposed to really giving us too much drive the other way. But I think he is important there. He really improved in that 2024 season, and he's one that's got to be in the side and just there for stability more than anything else. And then you go to the two sort of running defenders there. So I've got Caleb Daniel as the new recruit there, obviously. I think what he's going to give North Melbourne is some much needed control in the back half of the ground. North have been known over the last couple of years under Clarkson to sort of overpossess the ball in the back half, really try to get the ball in the hands of some of those younger guys like Sheasel and McKercher, but they do turn it over. I think, Caleb Daniel, a player that's sort of, pushing 30 years old at the moment, he probably doesn't have that absolute sort of speed and acceleration out of the back half, but he will be able to sit off the back of stoppages and just play that sort of conductor role, which I think in this team overall is going to be really important because of the lack of aerial assets that we have further up the field. So he's going to be important there. And then I've brought in the second year player now who's taken a couple of drafts ago, Riley Hardiman. I think he can really bring something to this team that players like McDonald and Fisher and Tucker we've tried back there. He's just got a little bit more offensive flair, a little bit more pace, and a bit more of a willingness to take the game on. I think he will make some mistakes, of course, but two players there, having Daniel and Hardiman, two players with really high-level foot skills, and we do have to start getting games into some of these guys. So I think you can sort of blood him in there. Overall, looking at the rest of the defense, it's quite stable and it's quite mature. So I think you can afford to have that one player in there sort of, fulfilling that more offensive role. And that just really works into his development as well. So overall, I'm pretty happy with that. I haven't got the interchange up there. I'm going to go to that at the end. So we'll get to that in a second. So then we move on to the midfield here, which is obviously headed there by Tristan Sherry in the ruck. He had an awesome 2024 season, and I expect even more from him in this next upcoming season. You look at the mids, we'll sort of start inside this centre square here. LDU, Harry Sheasel, and George Wardlaw. So I think it's more about getting the balance of these three players right. I definitely think they are going to be, moving forward, your three main midfielders in there. I think LDU, as much as he is that sort of powerful athlete, the guy that can kind of break through stoppage, you've also got George Wardlaw in there. I think the only sort of worry about this sort of midfield overall is the fact that all three of these players are quite offensively minded. You don't really get a lot of defensive stability. There's no sort of anchor in there to kind of offset that forward momentum. I think what they have done and what they've manufactured across the back half of 2024 is kind of using a combination of Tristan Sherry and George Wardlaw to take up that defensive slack. They've sort of held up a little bit more defensive positions and just made sure the opposition's best players don't get off the chain with their, elite pressure, elite physicality in there. You've got LDU sort of taking up that first hands player. He, most of the time for North Melbourne, he's the one that's getting his hands on the ball first. That's because he does have a little bit more maturity in his body. He's a little bit more physical than those other two players in Sheasel and Wardlaw. But then Wardlaw's still probably your most direct player. So he's taking up that, most meters gained per disposal type player. And then you've got Harry Sheasel, who's sort of operating in the most offensive spaces. He's kind of the last one to get his hands on the ball in the chain. And he's the one that's delivering the ball inside 50 and really leveraging his high footy IQ and ability to have that poise to hit targets inside forward 50. So I think how they've manufactured it, I think the balance is pretty good. Whether or not you'd go for someone like a Luke Parker in here who could sort of take up some of that defensive action. I think, when you've got your players coming off the bench, you will have some players in there that are a little bit more defensively minded and you can change the mix and that sort of thing. But obviously on pure talent at the moment, I think these three, just give them another season where they're trying to, get their hands on the ball at stoppage a little bit, creating and sort of making the blueprint for what we want to do going forward. Then you've got the wings out on the side there. You've got McKercher and Scott. So I've sort of moved McKercher up from that half-back role that he was playing last season, get him a little bit higher so we can use his foot skills inside forward 50. But McKercher's biggest weapon is his running ability. I think if North can manufacture McKercher to get out on the open side of the ground and be that sort of fat side winger, I think that's going to be really important. And then you've got Bailey Scott on the other side, who's probably more of your less talented player, but player that has that discipline to be able to, manufacture what I talked about with getting the ball in McKercher's hands more often than not. Scott can be the one that sort of pushes back into defense and sort of, helps to shield that area a little bit as well. Now, what these two wingers do lack is aerial game, really, compared to some of the competition's best wingers. And that's what I was talking about before with a player like Caleb Daniel, who can be that sort of conductor, that controller, that quarterback, really. He's going to have to be able to hit the kicks with more precision because you can't just go long to contest when you don't have the aerial players. And once we go into the forward half of the ground, we still do lack a little bit of, key position talent there as well. So I think that's important to note. But overall, if you look at the talent level on the park here in our best possible midfield, it's looking pretty good. So then we get to the forward line here. So again, we'll start with the key position players. Nick Larkey, he's just really performed unbelievably well over the last few seasons as that deep key position forward. I think he has to continue to play it. So then Darling goes to that player that's a little bit higher up the field as that sort of second tall. I think he operates in those areas, and he is going to have to get up the ground here a little bit to be able to provide a target when we are trying to exit defense and we just need to have that sort of rush kick. He's going to have to be the guy that's sitting underneath that ball. And then you've got Cam Zerha, who I've got here as a sort of third tall. He's going to have to play as tall as he possibly can in this lineup, the way that I've got it. Get to those contests and also help Darling be the one that pushes higher up the ground. What Zerha's also going to have to do, though, is operate at ground level, be there for pressure, as is Darling, to be honest. Darling was one of the best key position players at tackling inside forward 50, so he's going to have to help with that side of the game as well, because you generally don't get a lot of that from a player like Nick Larkey. You move on to the smalls there, so you've got Paul Curtis. He's going to play as that deeper small forward. He is a little bit of an aerial hybrid, Paul Curtis, but one of the weapons that he really has is that sort of explosive pace off the mark. He can really burst through, win those so important forward 50 contests that you really need to win and be able to break through the layer. Kick goals ultimately is what Curtis did in 2024. So I've loved his development, loved his trajectory, and I think being close to goal is a position that really suits him. And then I've just got the two sort of high half forwards. Midfielders come high half forwards, really. They're just getting manufactured into these roles for me. Tom Powell, I think he had a great season in 2024. He's got good run in his game and he's got good enough stoppage ability to be able to get up and help out those other midfielders with his run. Luke Parker, he just has the nous. He has the years of experience of doing this over and over. I think he's going to be able to go into that midfield, as I said, and sort of pinch hit and play that a little bit of a defensive role. But all of these players, if you look at Curtis, you look at Zerha, you look at Parker, and you look at Powell as those a little bit smaller type players, they all are really good at winning contests inside forward 50, which is so important for the modern game. One thing I will note, looking at this forward line, it probably still does lack one more sort of specialist forward, and I think the player that could sort of, become that type of player is someone like a Braden George. At the moment, I've just gone with this lineup. I think it probably gives us the most, for the 2025 season at least, it gives us the most stability, and we can sort of work with this as we blood some of those other newer guys into the game. We move on then to the interchange and a little bit of a wider look at the team. So I've got the 5-man bench there. Jai Simpkin, I think he comes into the midfield and plays a little bit of forward as well, but he'll just be one of those rotations. Again, I mentioned Luke Parker as that defensively minded midfielder. I think Jai Simpkin's probably going to have to take that position up as well. He's not a huge ball winner, and he's someone that, relies a little bit on his defensive work. Then I've got Teakle there, which I don't really like playing the second ruck, but I think Teakle's going to have to at times come into that forward line, and we probably lack a little bit of height overall in the team. So I think Teakle can do that. What he did last year, he was probably operating in the position that Darling would be, but we probably need that a little bit more height to come in when Zeri's on the bench and, so forth. So I've got him in there. I've then got Zane Dersma. Who's probably a little bit unlucky to not be on the field, but I just think we've got to get the balance right here. And I think if he's playing alongside Zerha, again, if you look at North Melbourne's recruiting, we've heavily recruited in the midfield zone, and we seem to have just a load of these like third tall type, medium forward midfielder types like Zerha, Eddie Ford, Zane Dersma. We had Jaden Stevenson as well. So I think Dersma can be in the best 23, but it's just a bit of a disbalance at this stage if you have, say, him and Zerha on the field. But we've got to get some development into him, even if he can play a little bit in the midfield. He's a versatile player, so I think it does work overall. Then I've got Finn O'Sullivan. I just think he can share his time between one of those half-forward positions that Powell and Luke Parker's taking up, but he can go into the midfield, and he's going to give you high impact per possession, this guy. We saw him in the VFL earlier in the year, how good he was at receiving the ball in tight spaces and being able to turn out. His evasiveness, his speed, and his power are really good. So I can't wait to watch Finn O'Sullivan. There has been a little bit of talk of him playing off the half-back as well, which is certainly possible. I've got Hardiman playing there. You've got McDonald, other players like that in the mix as well, but maybe Finn O'Sullivan could have a bit of a initiation back there as well. Darcy Tucker is the last player I've got on the bench. Whether he's a sub, whether he's one of the last four, I'm not too sure, but I think he just gives a little bit of flexibility, gives you an extra defender or an extra winger, even an extra midfielder if you really needed it. So I went for him I think he had a pretty consistent year in 2024, and I think he does give you that flexibility that you need. If you look down at the emergencies there, Will Dawson, who I think is a really talented sort of projecting key defender. I don't think he quite gets into the team at this stage if it's full strength, but I have high hopes for him in the future. We've got Josh Gota there as well. He probably misses out on the fact that Riley Hardiman's going into that role. He could be that sort of dashing defender as well. And then Braden George. I just need to see a little bit more from these guys before I put them in the team. I think Braden George has an injury that is going to keep him out at the beginning of the season as well. But I think George is really important for this team going forward. I said we lack a little bit of the genuine sort of small forwards. Him and Paul Curtis could get up a really good combination here with George playing a little bit higher up the ground. He plays a little bit similar, George, to someone like a Toby Green. So I think he's going to be really important going forward as well. And that just leaves us overall to talk about some of the players that I haven't got in the team, which may be a little bit controversial here. Here are some of the notables. Will Phillips does not make the team. I just think he lacks versatility. He's pretty much a genuine sort of engine type midfielder, someone that has to be, pouncing on loose balls and getting involved in the game that way. I just think he doesn't have enough versatility or flexibility or sort of speed or power or any of those things in his game to play amongst what we already have. And I think he's a bit of a lesson if you look at the recruiting and the overcapitalisation, I guess, in the midfield zone. Will Phillips is sort of the symptom of that in the sense that these players aren't even making the best 22, 23 because of how much we have recruited in the midfield. And same with players like Dersma who weren't getting on the field and may even be emergency come round one. You look at those players, it's just, if you have too many, you overcapitalise and you miss out. I've got Luke McDonald here. I just don't really see with how badly we need to get games into players like Hardiman, like George. We still might play Finn O'Sullivan back there. Colby McKercher might play a bit of time across halfback as well. I just don't really think you can waste a spot at this point on Luke McDonald, who you've still got your captain there in Jai Simpkin. I just think he has to miss out on this team ultimately. I know that's going to be a little bit controversial because he is one of the captains, but I can't see it any other way. Then we've got Matt Whitlock. I think he just needs to spend some time in the VFL developing as that key position player. He's 200 centimetres. Not many players like that have an impact in their first year. Dylan Stevens, he's probably one I just don't think is good enough to take up one of those wing roles. He was pick 6 a few years ago to the Swans. We've traded out an end of first rounder for him. I just don't really think the quality is there, or I don't think he's good enough to make it. And Zach Fisher, quite similar to what I said about Luke McDonald, to be honest. I just don't think he's in the best team. I think we've got to try to get games into players like Hardiman, and he's ultimately one that misses out. So that is a wrap for my North Melbourne Best 23. Guys, most importantly for this video, let me know what you would do down in the comments below if you're a North Melbourne supporter, even if you're just a general AFL fan. I'm sure some of those are a little bit controversial. No Luke McDonald, which is the captain. That's a big one. No Zach Fisher. Those types I think will surprise a few people. But let me know what you think, guys, and I'll see you next time.